He thought he still had everything under control, but JD Vance turned what seemed like a routine hearing into the biggest political earthquake in America. Who could have predicted that a single black briefcase and a few stacks of documents would bring down the career of Tim Walz, Minnesota's hero? Why did a governor once praised for his integrity become the center of a scandal involving finance, security, and betrayal of public trust? And more importantly, what was it about the numbers, signatures, and data logs that silenced Congress and left Americans asking who was really running this country? In a packed hearing room with every spotlight trained on the witness table, JD Vance sat across from Tim Walz, not as a politician, but as a prosecutor holding evidence capable of changing history. Outside, the media anticipated a political battle of wits, but what they witnessed was a public dissection, peeling away layers of deception. It all began with a single question: where did the people's money go, Governor? And from that moment, America was never the same. The special session of the Congressional Oversight Committee opened under cold white light. At the center sat the two main figures, Vice President JD Vance and former Governor Tim Walz. The nation watched live. This was no longer an ordinary questioning. It was a clash of two worlds, one side accused of manipulating budgets, the other armed with documents to prove it. Walz began with a confident tone, emphasizing each word as if campaigning. He declared himself clean and transparent, claiming the Green Future Environmental Fund was proof of Minnesota's sustainable vision. He said he was being attacked for not following Washington's playbook. Vance sat still, lightly flipping through documents, his eyes never leaving Walz. When Walz finished, Vance spoke slowly, clearly. "Then help me understand, sir, why $68 million from this fund's budget vanished." The room froze. Walz raised an eyebrow, forcing a smile. "That's just a temporary accounting discrepancy, common at the state level." JD didn't respond. He opened the first slide. The screen displayed 3 companies receiving funds, all at the same address, all registered to the same person. All 3 signed consulting contracts in the same week, JD said evenly. "And the final approver was you." Walz leaned toward the microphone. "Those contracts were reviewed by multiple levels, not just me." JD pointed to the bottom right of the document, where the electronic signature T. Walz stood out clearly. "Only one person signed," he replied, "and that was you." The chair called for verification. A technician nodded. The document was valid, verified. Walz adjusted his glasses, his voice faltering. "This is a political game." JD didn't look at him. "If politics is the path to truth, then today is the start." The room fell silent. A committee member asked, "Do you have evidence to refute this, Governor?" Walz didn't answer, only pursed his lips. JD placed another stack of papers on the table, a bank transfer record, marked with red arrows from the state budget to a company owned by Walz's relative. "This isn't an accounting error," he said. "It's a pattern." Walz leaned back, sweat beading on his forehead. Every camera focused on him. JD closed the first file, his voice calm. "We'll move on to part 2, off-the-books accounts." The hearing wasn't even 20 minutes in, but the atmosphere was thick. What unfolded was no longer a debate. It was an unmasking, and JD Vance had just drawn the first knife. JD Vance opened the second briefcase, pulling out a thick stack of documents, clipped with yellow sticky notes numbered in sequence. The room was silent as he turned to the first page, his voice steady, neither rising nor falling, just raw facts, carrying the weight of truth. "The committee has received a detailed report on the Green Future Initiative Fund, part of Minnesota's state budget, from 2021-2023, JD said, his hand resting lightly on the file. "According to cross-reference data from the federal treasury, 42 companies received direct funding from the fund, but 7 of those companies don't legally exist. No operating address, no employees, no tax filings." He paused briefly. "Yet they still received a total of $68 million over 14 months. The screen behind him lit up, displaying a flowchart of funds. Company names appeared: EcoStream LLC, Northstar Consulting, Midwest Renewal Partners, alongside red arrows pointing to 3 circled names, all bearing the surname Walz. A murmur spread through the room. The chair leaned toward the microphone, asking JD to verify the data source. He replied concisely, "Extracted from the state budget payment system, confirmed by the Treasury Department on May 12th. Walz tried to maintain a calm tone, insisting the companies were auxiliary partners in the program and that he didn't directly interfere in the contract approval process. But JD left no room. He flipped to page 8, holding it up to the camera. This is the approval document for EcoStream LLC's contract, signed March 14th, 2022. The signature in the bottom right, T. Walz. Walz blinked, his lips twitching slightly. I sign hundreds of documents a week. I can't remember every one, he said, attempting a smile, and signing doesn't mean I directly oversaw them. JD leaned down, pulling out another document. Then perhaps you'll remember this, a record of a meeting on March 10th, just 4 days before the contract was signed. In it, you requested expedited disbursements to create media impact before the primary election. A chill swept through the room. The chair raised an eyebrow. Governor Walz, do you confirm this is an authentic record? Walz hesitated. I haven't reviewed it, so I can't confirm. JD responded immediately. The committee has verified it. The original was submitted from the governor's office internal address by your own secretary to the state audit committee. Camera shutters clicked from the press section. Walz bowed his head, hands clasped tightly. JD continued, unwavering. During that time, records show you were campaigning for re-election. $2.8 million in media expenses were paid through Midwest Renewal Partners, a company not registered for advertising, but sharing the same chief accountant as your campaign. He paused, looking directly at Walz. Same overseer, same bank account, same disbursement date. Quite a coincidence. A committee member asked Governor Walz, would you like to explain why these companies shared the same financial system? Walz exhaled sharply, speaking quickly. It could be an accounting error. All contracts were reviewed through a transparent process. I had no direct approval authority over any funds. JD didn't respond, only tapped his pen on the table 3 times, the sharp sound echoing in the silent room. Then he held up another page, showing Walz's electronic signature with a government server authentication code. This is proof of the digital signature. You didn't need to approve, because you already did. No one spoke. Walz leaned back, staring at the papers before him, while JD closed the file and placed it neatly to his right, like a chessboard after the first move. He looked at the chair, voice calm. The first file is complete. The numbers speak for themselves. The room remained silent, but no one believed this was an accounting mistake anymore. The first truth had been laid on the table, and JD Vance was only beginning to open his briefcase. The air in the hearing room remained heavy after JD's first presentation. The audience was still reeling when he opened the third briefcase, pulling out a thinner stack of documents bound with a red cord. The title on the cover caught the committee's attention. Robert Hellman, Chief Financial Officer, Green Future Initiative. JD looked directly at Walz, his voice slow, steady, and cold as steel. This is the file on the man who is responsible for managing the finances of the entire project you just denied involvement in. A committee member leaned forward. JD opened the first page. A copy of Robert Hellman's death certificate, signed by Minneapolis Police, dated November 18, 2023. The final note in the file, suicide by sleeping pills, no note left. He paused for a few seconds, then continued. But 4 days before he was found dead in his apartment, Mr. Hellman sent an email to the state audit department, titled, Can No Longer Falsify Records. A wave of murmurs swept the room. JD signaled, and the large screen behind him displayed the recovered email. If they know I kept the original ledger, I won't be alive much longer. The disbursements don't match. I was asked to sign without question. I need to speak to someone outside the office. The room fell silent. Walz sat motionless, hands gripping each other tightly on the table, his gaze fixed on the floor. JD continued. 3 days later, Mr. Hellman disappeared. The police concluded suicide. But I have here what the police didn't see. Notes extracted from the Green Future Office hard drive, saved at 10:17 p.m. the night before he vanished. He placed a sealed envelope on the table, opening it to reveal sheets one by one. Handwritten notes in blue ink listed expenditures, with the final line boldly underlined, cover up. Next to it was another sheet, a recovered internal email from a backup server. The content was brief, but cut through the air like a blade. Robert, if you still have the original data, destroy it immediately. Don't let anyone trace it back to the office. I repeat, everything must disappear before the audit arrives. At the bottom was the electronic signature of a senior aide in the governor's office. JD didn't need to comment. He simply looked at Walz, a gaze that forced the other man to lower his eyes. The chair requested a pause to verify the document's authenticity, but JD was a step ahead. The state audit committee, and the FBI have confirmed the original copies. Metadata shows this email was sent from the governor's office internal server at 2:08 a.m., 12 hours before Mr. Hellman was reported missing. Another committee member, voice trembling. Mr. Vance, are you suggesting this was a cover-up involving evidence suppression? JD replied tersely, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm presenting facts. He pulled out another report, an internal meeting record, with Hellman's handwritten note in the margin, warning about legal risks, not to use project funds for political media. Below it was the approval signature T. Walz, marked in red ink. JD held the paper up next to the screen, which displayed forensic confirmation of the signature's authenticity. Walz lifted his head slightly, his voice hoarse. I never ordered any documents destroyed. Mr. Hellman was directly responsible. I'm not accountable for his personal actions. JD responded without hesitation. He didn't destroy them, sir. He kept them. The silence stretched. A few committee members exchanged glances. The chair leaned back, voice low. Vice President, the committee will need copies of all this data. We're no longer looking at administrative violations. JD nodded, closing the file, then said firmly, I've provided the FBI with copies of the hard drive and network logs. The evidence isn't in words. It's in every line of code in their system. The screen's light still shone on Walz's face, making him look pale and aged by decades. The man once seen as Minnesota's symbol of transparency now sat like a statue, surrounded by documents turned into evidence. The chair surveyed the room, voice dry. The committee will forward all files to the Department of Justice for a criminal investigation. The hearing is recessed for 15 minutes. The gavel struck, but no one moved. In those few seconds of silence, America seemed to hear the sound of a truth being uncorked. JD gathered his documents, his expression still calm. For him, this wasn't the end, just the start of a case where, for the first time, power was forced to answer with facts, not excuses. When the hearing resumed, the room's atmosphere had shifted entirely. Gone were the whispers and keyboard taps from reporters. Only a thick silence remained, as if everyone understood that what had been revealed was no longer just financial irregularities, but something far darker. JD Vance returned to his seat, the fourth briefcase neatly placed on the table. He unclipped it, flipping to the first page. The cover read simply, Veterans Family Support Program, 2019-2022. Committee JD began, voice still calm and steady. This program was established to support families of fallen veterans in Minnesota. Total federal funding allocated to the state during this period was $130 million. The goal, housing, healthcare, and education support for their kin. But according to the records I have here, over a third of that money never reached the people the program promised to help. He paused, signaling the technician to activate the screen. A budget chart appeared, with red lines dominating nearly half the breakdown. This is the portion allocated to three consulting firms, Valor Strategies, United Servicemen Group, and Midwest Vets Foundation. According to tax records, all three have no employees, no profit reports, and no tax filings since 2020. JD glanced at Walz. Yet they received a total of $47 million from the program's budget over 18 months. Walz leaned toward the microphone, voice straining to stay calm. Those companies were subcontractors, working through affiliated projects. I didn't directly manage the details of each contract. JD calmly opened another page. You didn't need to manage each contract, he said. You just needed to approve the revised report. He held up a document titled Revised Allocation Statement, October 2021. The signature at the bottom right read clearly, T. Walz. A committee member near the chair asked immediately, Vice President, is there evidence this revision was made for political reasons? JD replied without hesitation, yes, and it's right here. He placed an internal memo on the table, sent by the governor's office communications director to the finance team 7 days before the report's release. The first line read, need to reduce error rates below 1% to avoid impacting the re-election campaign. At the bottom was the electronic signature of the governor's office chief of staff. Walz closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, his voice hoarse. Those memos don't reflect the full context. I wasn't involved in the communication details. JD didn't counter directly. He signaled the technician to display a handwritten note, photographed from a September 2021 meeting notebook, scrawled in blue ink, must revise data before October report. Below it were three initials, TWZ. The room went quiet. The chair looked at Walz. Do you deny this is your signature? Walz hesitated. I can't confirm. I signed too many documents. JD's voice remained steady, almost cold. You signed for Image, but Image doesn't feed the children of fallen soldiers. He pulled out another file. A list of 212 veteran families recorded as supported, but federal audits verified 137 of them never received a dime. I've met 3 of them, JD said. A mother in Rochester, a widow in Duluth, and a son living in a truck in St. Cloud. They all said the same thing. We thought our father was forgotten. The room reeled under the weight of silence. A committee member stood, requesting a pause to verify the files and witnesses. But JD shook his head. No need, he said, because there's one final piece of evidence. He handed a small hard drive to the technician. The screen lit up, showing a chain of internal emails between Walz and his communications advisor. Subject: Veterans Fund Narrative. Handling the press. In it, Walz wrote, "We need to control the story. Financial discrepancies will be overlooked if the patriotism message is emphasized." Gasps echoed through the room. Walz lowered his face, silent. JD closed the file, his voice still calm but heavy as a hammer. You spoke of patriotism, but used the pain of soldiers to protect your campaign. And now, when asked, you say, I don't remember. The problem is, the numbers never forget. The chair looked around, then said slowly, the committee formally recognizes this file as having criminal elements. The Department of Justice will be notified. JD gathered his papers, his eyes never leaving Walz. We will continue. This is only the first of 3 federal programs under investigation. The room's atmosphere was heavy. Those in the back exchanged glances. Everyone understood that what was coming would be even weightier. If funds for veterans could be twisted, no budget was safe. JD glanced at his watch, then flipped to the next file, his voice ringing clear. Next section, Global Education Fund. JD Vance turned the final page of the veterans file, then slowly set the papers down. The air in the room was so heavy, you could hear people breathing. He looked at the chair, gave a slight nod, and opened the next briefcase. A dark green file labeled Global Education Initiative, Minnesota International Exchange, 2020-2023. Committee, JD said, voice steady. We've talked about money for those who've fallen. Now it's time to talk about money for those growing up. He signaled the technician, and the large screen behind him lit up, displaying a budget expenditure chart for the Global Education Program, a project heavily promoted under Walz with the slogan Minnesota Students, Citizens of the World. The stated goal: expand international exchange opportunities, teach foreign languages, and provide global technology education for high school students. But just below the chart was a row of red numbers, $27.4 million in media and promotional costs. JD looked up, his gaze fixed on Walz. Over 3 years, nearly 30% of the education program's funding went to private media companies. According to audit reports, 11 of the 14 major contracts were awarded to businesses directly or indirectly tied to your re-election campaign. He pointed to the screen. A list appeared. Bright Path Media, North Point Strategies, Blue Horizon Group, all linked to advisors who worked on Walz's campaign team. Walz gave a strained smile, leaning slightly toward the microphone. Those companies were selected through a public bidding process. I had no involvement in choosing contractors. JD didn't argue with words. He opened another file, holding up a consulting contract. Blue Horizon Group, Global School Image Media's contract, valued at $6.2 million. He read line by line. Clause 4, enhance brand recognition and state leadership identity in educational media campaigns. The room buzzed. A committee member frowned. Vice President, what does that clause mean? JD replied, voice unchanged. It means the state's education budget was used to promote a politician's personal image during a campaign. He placed 3 more contracts side by side, each with payment invoices, a total of $18.5 million for a campaign to introduce Minnesota's leadership to the world. At the bottom right of each contract was the signature of the Chief Financial Officer of Walz for America 2022. Walz leaned forward, his voice higher than usual. I didn't know those documents existed. This is a misunderstanding. Those companies operated independently. JD looked straight ahead, unflinching. Then let's look at the receiving account. He displayed a bank statement screenshot. $1.2 million from the education budget transferred to Education Progress Media, then forwarded 24 hours later to Walz committee. That was a voluntary business contribution. Walz said quickly, "They're free to donate to any campaign." JD responded, "No, sir. Federal law prohibits political contributions using budget funds." And this transaction occurred just 48 hours after the media contract was signed. The chair looked down, jotting something into the record. JD opened one final page, an internal memo from the state's communications advisor. The handwritten note at the top read, "The entire global education campaign will simultaneously promote the governor's image domestically and internationally, ensure anonymous funding sources to avoid election regulations." Walz stood abruptly, hands braced on the table. "This is a distortion. You're trying to make me look like a criminal just for investing in children's futures." JD remained seated, his voice unchanged. "If children's futures depend on laundering budgets through campaign efforts, perhaps we should teach them a different lesson about accountability." No one spoke further. The chair instructed Walz to sit, then turned to JD. "Do you have evidence that Mr. Walz directly ordered this?" JD nodded. He held up an internal audio recording from a June 2021 meeting, in which Walz told the communications team, "We need to leverage education projects to bolster the state's image. It's both an investment and a campaign." A small shockwave rippled through the seats. Walz leaned back, eyes closed. JD closed the file, neatly stacking it on the table. His voice firm, 3 programs, 3 identical patterns, public funds vanishing into private hands, leaving a polished image for one man and financial wounds for the entire state. This is no longer about public ethics. This is a betrayal of trust. The chair nodded, signaling staff to record the files as official evidence. JD adjusted his microphone, his voice low but clear. "We will continue." Next section, data from the internal hard drive. The room fell silent. Walz still hadn't opened his eyes. Inside JD's briefcase, the next file was ready, and no one in the room doubted that what came next would be even heavier. JD Vance pulled a transparent plastic bag with an FBI seal from the briefcase beside him. Under the cold light, a small silver hard drive sat inside, labeled Evidence, Minnesota State Office Server 2023. The room was utterly still. JD stood, placing the exhibit on the table, his voice low and deliberate. "Committee, this is a hard drive recovered from the Minnesota Governor's Office internal system. It was submitted by a finance staffer under the Whistleblower Protection Program. The data inside contains the original accounting records, before they were altered and released to the public." He signaled the technician. The large screen behind him displayed the accounting system interface, with files marked by code numbers. JD pointed to a folder named Budget_Reconciliation_TW 2022. "This is the original spending report Mr. Walz submitted to the state Congress last December," he said. "The public version included 42 detailed tables. This one has 57. 15 tables were hidden from the system before submission." Walz leaned slightly forward, trying to keep his voice steady. "I don't know about that hard drive. It could be unprocessed test data." JD didn't respond, only signaled to zoom in on an internal memo folder labeled Guideline_Notes. The text appeared clearly on the screen. "Media spending control strategy. Avoid direct links to the governor's office. Use auxiliary education program budgets to cover hidden media campaign costs. Keep total spending below 2% to avoid triggering automatic audits." Below was a digital signature, T. Walz, and a timestamp, 2146, June 14, 2022. A low murmur spread through the room. The chair requested the technical team to verify the signature code. After a few seconds, an auditor stood. "The digital signature is valid. It was generated from a computer registered to Governor Walz's account." Walz blinked rapidly, trying to stay calm. "Impossible. I didn't sign any documents outside the official management system." JD turned, his voice not loud but heavy. "This is the official system, sir. This data resides on the central server, untamperable without high-level administrative access." He moved to another file, Finance Review_Internal Draft.xls. Asterisk columns of data appeared, with margin notes. Transfer $4.3 million from Veterans Fund to Education Media line. Reason, joint project. Another note, ensure federal budget sources are not listed in column G. Replace with local contribution. JD paused, addressing the committee. "This isn't an administrative error. These are detailed instructions on how to conceal spending, written by the state's executive office itself." The chair tapped the gavel lightly. The committee requests data verification. A technician read the validation report. These files carried digital signatures synced with the accounts of 3 senior officials in the governor's office, including Mr. Walz. The creation dates align with the public report's editing period. Walz gripped his hands tightly, speaking hoarsely. You can't rely on files of unclear origin to accuse a governor. I don't know which staffer did this. JD tilted his head, his gaze cold. The staffer is still alive and has provided a sworn statement. She was the accountant managing the data system. In her affidavit, she wrote, all editing instructions came directly from Mr. Walz's advisor. Records were deleted using the governor's account. The room buzzed with whispers. The chair sighed. So, Mr. Vance, we're witnessing the first evidence of intentional budget data manipulation. JD replied firmly. Not just intentional, but systematic. This is a structured operation, with each expenditure layered through fake projects to evade audits. All roads lead to one point, the governor's approval authority. He displayed a final diagram, a network of arrows connecting Green Future, Veterans Fund, and Education Initiative. At the center was a red circle labeled Governor's Executive Office. The arrows showed funds cycling back and forth, often within the same month. JD closed the file, his voice low but clear. From this point, we're no longer talking about administrative errors. This is a deliberate, maintained budget fraud model, operated directly from the Minnesota governor's office. No one spoke further. The chair looked around, then slowly nodded, noting in the record, proceeding to a federal-level criminal investigation. JD placed the hard drive back into the sealed bag, sliding it to the legal staff. He sat down, arms crossed, eyes never leaving Walz, who stared blankly at the darkened screen, where his name had just appeared as the hub of a vast network. The chair's gavel had barely sounded when JD Vance stood again. He adjusted his microphone, his voice calm but resolute. Committee, the next section isn't just about data, it's about people, those who saw it from the inside. The hearing room door opened, and a middle-aged woman stepped in. She wore a gray blazer, her face calm but her eyes wary. The chair introduced her briefly. Karen Holt, former financial advisor to the Minnesota governor's office, who resigned 3 months before the investigation began. She took the witness stand, placed her hand on the oath, and swore to tell the truth. JD stepped aside, letting the committee's focus shift to the witness. Miss Holt, he began, you worked directly in the budget coordination team of the governor's office from 2019 to 2023, correct? Yes, she replied, her voice slightly shaky. I was responsible for overseeing quarterly financial reports and adjusting balance sheets across programs. Did you ever receive instructions related to altering or concealing expenditures? She took a deep breath. Yes, multiple times, especially in the Green Future and Education Initiative projects. JD nodded, opening the file before him and pulling out a copy of an internal meeting record. He placed it on the table. Committee, this is a document provided by Miss Holt. Minutes from a February 7th, 2022, meeting between Mr. Walz's political advisor and the finance team. He signaled the technician to display the content on the screen. The text appeared clearly. Objective: reallocate federal budgets to symbolic programs. Reduce spending ratios for veterans and public education. Increase spending for environmental projects to serve media purposes. At the bottom were the signatures of 3 people, including K. Holt and T. Walz. The room buzzed with murmurs. The chair called for silence. JD turned to the witness. Miss Holt, do you confirm this is an accurate copy of the original minutes? Yes, she said, hands clasped tightly. After that meeting, I was instructed to revise the first quarter budget report. When I objected because the numbers didn't match, I was told it was necessary to maintain a stable image for the administration. Who said that? Karen swallowed hard. Governor Walz. Her words landed like weights, thickening the air. JD paused for a few seconds, then continued. Miss Holt, in your affidavit, you mentioned a hidden campaign using state budgets for political activities. Can you elaborate? Yes, she replied. In 2021, during the re-election phase, a portion of the global education program's funding was diverted under the category educational media, but in reality, that money was used to hire companies to promote Mr. Walz's personal image. I was tasked with erasing those expenditure lines from the federal report. Did you follow that directive? She shook her head. No. I refused and submitted my resignation 3 months later. JD stepped forward, placing an envelope before the chair. In this envelope is a recording of a meeting between Miss Holt and the governor's office chief financial officer, dated March 15, 2022. It confirms instructions to adjust records to avoid media risks during the election season. The original has been sent to the FBI. The chair nodded, noting the evidence. His gaze shifted to Walz, who sat rigid, hands clasped tightly. JD continued, his voice steady and cold. Miss Holt, according to you, was this adjustment a one-time act? No, she replied. It wasn't isolated. It was a process. Every staffer understood. If a number was unfavorable, it had to be recoordinated. That was the code word. The room fell utterly silent. JD closed the file, returned to his seat, his eyes sweeping past Walz. He didn't need to say more. The witness's testimony spoke for itself. The chair asked one final time, Governor Walz, do you have any response to the testimony just given? Walz inhaled sharply, then exhaled slowly. I don't recall that meeting. I didn't order anyone to alter reports. I always acted in the state's best interest. JD leaned forward, his voice low but resonant across the room. The state's interest or your own? Walz didn't answer. He bowed his head, eyes avoiding everyone's gaze. JD gathered his files, his voice clear, addressing the committee. From data to testimony to signatures, every piece fits. We're no longer talking about hypotheses, but a systematic truth. The room sank into heavy silence. No one doubted anymore. The matter had spiraled beyond political control. JD Vance leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes fixed on the silent man before him, once a figure who stood on podiums promising public service, now exposed by the numbers and words of his own subordinates. The hearing continued, but everyone understood. The line between power and guilt had been erased forever. The air in the hearing room grew heavier after Karen Holt's testimony concluded. The chair hadn't even struck the gavel when JD Vance stood, his face still calm but his eyes sharp as knives. He spoke briefly. Committee, the witness has shown us the internal picture. Now I present the final piece of the financial chain, the link tying this entire system together. He opened the final leather briefcase, pulling out a thick black file with a red label in the corner. Project North Star. Classified energy contract. The room instantly fell silent. JD placed the file on the table, his voice steady and firm. This is a classified energy consulting contract, signed in September 2022 between the Minnesota Governor's Office and North Star Energy Solutions, LLC. Total value, $62.7 million. But this company doesn't exist in any state or federal business registry. No headquarters, no employees, no tax ID. A ghost company. He handed the file to the technician, signaling to display it on the screen. The image was clear, a business certificate, completely blank in the address section. The representative listed as J. Adams, a name untraceable in any registry. JD continued. The contract's funds were disbursed in 3 installments, each over $20 million. The receiving account was at a Minneapolis bank, opened less than a month before the contract was signed. One small detail. The account was registered under the authorization of Mr. Walz's personal financial advisor. Walz furrowed his brow, trying to keep his voice firm. This is false information. Project North Star was a strategic clean energy program, as I clearly stated in last year's report. JD nodded slightly. Yes, there was a North Star program, but it was a proposal never approved, with no budget allocated. Yet you still signed the implementation contract, and the digital signature at the bottom of this contract is verified as yours. He displayed a zoomed-in image of the contract's final page. The electronic signature T. Walz, along with a digital authentication code, was clear on the screen. JD pointed, this is undeniable evidence. This authentication code matches the digital signatures on documents you signed previously, including budget disbursement records and education program reports. The chair looked to the technical team. A staffer stood, speaking briefly. The authentication code is valid. It was generated from a device registered to Mr. Walz's personal account. Walz lowered his head slightly, hands clasped tightly. JD flipped to the next page, his voice steady, no excess inflection. This is an internal email between the governor's office and the state energy department. Content: keep the North Star contract confidential. No public disclosure until after the election. Media may only refer to the project as an experimental research initiative. He looked up directly at Walz. My question is simple, sir. Why did a $62 million contract need to be kept secret until after the election? No answer came. Walz remained silent, his gaze drifting. JD continued. Here's the interesting part. On October 3rd, 2 weeks after the contract was signed, the first $15 million was transferred to the company's auxiliary account. 3 days later, a near-identical sum was forwarded to a small investment fund in Delaware, managed by your campaign's lawyer. A committee member couldn't hold back, asking loudly, "Are you saying state energy funds were laundered through a private fund?" JD nodded. Precisely. And because North Star used federal funds, this constitutes federal-level budget fraud. The chair immediately noted, his voice low. The committee officially refers all files to the Department of Justice and the Department of Energy for criminal investigation. Walz lunged toward the microphone, his voice trembling. This is fabricated. I never ordered any disbursements. I don't know who signed that contract. JD didn't respond, only opened the final file, a system login authentication record. Every time an account signs a contract, the system logs the IP address. The final line states, device ID TMW0239, location Governor's Office, Paul, Minnesota. That's the computer in your office. The room's air seemed to vanish. All eyes turned to Walz, the man struggling to find words, his lips barely moving. JD closed the file, resting his hand on it like a final punctuation. We've gone from numbers to testimony to electronic data, all point to the same place. There's no doubt left. This is a budget fraud model, established, operated, and concealed from the highest level of Minnesota's state government. The chair looked up, voice stern. The committee notes, elements of federal-level fraud, document falsification, and budget misappropriation. JD said no more, gathering his files and looking at Walz, a gaze not of hatred, but like a verdict, already delivered. The room sank into silence. Walz sat still, his face shadowed under the white lights. No one needed to say more. Project North Star wasn't just a ghost contract. It was the full stop on the career of a man once called Minnesota's moral icon. The hearing room was deathly silent. Only the faint rustle of paper sounded as JD Vance pulled out the next file, a thinner one, marked with a bold red label, beneficiary list, restricted access. He said nothing for a few seconds, his eyes fixed on Walz, who now sat with his head bowed low, hands tightly clasped, avoiding every gaze. Then JD began, his voice low, clear, each word falling like stones on the cold floor. Committee, we've seen the fraud system. Now this is the list of those who directly benefited from those funds. He opened the file, pulling out the first sheet. This document was extracted from the internal payment database of the governor's office, stored on the same server as Project North Star. It lists 28 individuals and entities that received unexplained transfers from the budgets of the Green Future, Veterans Fund, and global education programs. Total value, $38.4 million. He held up the second sheet, projecting it onto the large screen. The list appeared line by line, names, addresses, payment dates, and reasons for payment. Line 12 stopped the room cold. Evelyn Walz, consulting support, $275,000. JD looked up, his voice steady. According to tax records, Evelyn Walz is the wife of Mr. Tim Walz. She held no position in any state agency or affiliated company tied to the Green Future program. Yet, on October 12, 2022, she received a payment of $275,000 from the program's auxiliary account, noted as environmental community consulting. Walz flinched, looking up, his voice faltering. My wife has nothing to do with this. It could be a payment for a charitable project. I don't know the details. JD responded bluntly. Sir, the Green Future Fund has no category called community consulting, and that expenditure was never recorded in the state budget. He paused, eyes fixed on Walz. Here is the bank statement of Evelyn Walz, showing that amount deposited directly into her personal account, 3 days before your campaign released a new promotional video. A committee member immediately requested verification of Walz's and his family's personal income sources. JD continued, leaving no room for a response. Not only that, this list includes 2 other relatives. Mark Walz, your brother, received $430,000 for logistics services, and Susan Miller, your cousin, received $190,000 for clean energy consulting. Both of their companies have no actual operations and stopped filing taxes in 2019. The room buzzed with murmurs. The chair called for order. But everyone understood the line between suspicion and evidence had vanished. JD folded his hands, his voice maintaining its steady rhythm. The money flow structure was deliberately designed. These funds were funneled through two layers of intermediaries, North Star Energy Solutions and Midwest Renewal Partners, then distributed to the personal accounts of Mr. Walz's relatives. I've sent the entire transaction chain to the Federal Treasury Department. Preliminary verification shows most of these funds were approved by the electronic account T. Walz. Walz leaned back in his chair, hands clenched into fists, sweat beading on his forehead. His voice was hoarse, struggling to stay steady. You don't understand. My family is being dragged into this to smear me. I didn't transfer money to anyone. JD replied, still calm but cold. You didn't need to transfer it. The system did it for you. All it took was one approval signature from you, and every transaction was automatically triggered. A committee member stood, addressing Walz sternly. Mr. Walz, the committee requests that you submit all personal and family income records within 48 hours for cross-referencing. This is a mandatory procedure when conflicts of interest between public funds and personal assets are detected. Walz remained silent, eyes down, jaw clenched. JD continued, his voice low but forceful. Committee, if this were merely an administrative error, there wouldn't be 17 personal accounts benefiting. If it were a mistake, there wouldn't be 3 relatives on the same list. He pointed to the final line on the screen. Walz Committee, transfer via Education Fund, $1,050,000. This, he said, is the link between public funds and a political campaign. $1 million was transferred from the education budget to your campaign account, exactly 2 weeks before the election began. The room erupted in chatter. The chair slammed the gavel. Order. All these documents will be sealed and forwarded to federal auditors. JD gathered his files, his expression still calm. We've seen the money trail. Questions about motive are no longer necessary. Mr. Walz didn't just conceal misconduct. He turned the state budget into his personal account. Walz raised his hand, wiping his forehead, his voice softer. I didn't know about those payments. Someone might have misused my name. JD looked directly at him, his gaze icy. Sir, no one misuses your electronic signature 37 times. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Walz slumped back in his chair, eyes vacant. The pressure bore down on him, and for the first time in the hearing, he stopped trying to defend himself. The committee recorded all the files, announcing an expanded investigation into personal assets. JD closed his documents, his voice slow and deliberate. We've reached the center of the maze, and at its heart, it's not a system, it's a name. The room remained silent after the beneficiary list was displayed. Walz sat motionless, hands clenched tightly, his gaze blank. JD Vance gently turned the microphone in front of him, his voice resonating, steady but heavier than ever. Committee, the next section will show that Mr. Walz didn't just deceive. He tried to erase the evidence. This is the most critical part. He opened the briefcase beside him, pulling out a thin file with a bold red label. Internal directive, system deletion order. This is an internal order sent from the executive account of the Minnesota Governor's Office on the evening of November 17, 2023. Just 6 hours after the FBI issued a subpoena for data related to the Green Future, Veterans Fund, and Education Initiative programs. He signaled the technician to activate the screen. An email appeared, its subject line short but chilling. Subject emergency directive. Purge all non-essential data before midnight. From governor.office@state.mn.us to IT_admins_group. Time, 1847. November 17, 2023. JD read slowly. Execute a full system cleanup of temporary files, backups, and unverified data before 0 o'clock. Do not ask for reasons. Do not log actions. Confirm completion via internal message. He looked up. This order was sent exactly 6 hours and 42 minutes after the FBI's subpoena, 2 hours after the order was issued. The server's access logs were completely wiped. However, the state's technology department's automatic backup system retained a temporary log. On the screen, the log appeared line by line, 19 hours, 12 minutes, and 48 seconds. Admin_TW. Authorized delete request, 19 hours, 14 minutes, and 7 seconds. System file purge initiated, 19 hours, 28 minutes, and 32 seconds. User T. Walz. Override confirmation, 19 hours, 29 minutes, and 1 second. Deletion complete. 11,437 files removed. The room froze. The chair stared at the screen. His voice low. T. Walz. Refers to which account? JD replied. The only executive account with authority to confirm data deletion. It belongs to the governor's office, registered directly under Tim Walz's name. Walz stood abruptly, his voice hoarse. I never ordered anything deleted. Maybe a technician acted without consulting me. JD didn't look at him, only held up another sheet. This is the internal confirmation sent by the technical team after completing the deletion. He read aloud. Task completed ahead of schedule. No backups remain. Only edited budget data retained as requested. J.H., Senior IT Specialist. He looked up, his voice lower. The staffer who signed this email, James Hollis, has testified to the FBI that the order was verbally relayed by the chief advisor, with the statement, "This is a direct request from Mr. Walz. Do it now before the feds access the system." Murmurs rose again. The chair slammed the gavel to restore order. He looked at Walz, voice stern. "Do you wish to deny this is your account?" Walz swallowed hard, his voice noticeably weaker. I don't recall saying that. They might have misunderstood." JD responded immediately. A misunderstanding doesn't generate an authenticated digital signature. You confirm the deletion on the system with an executive code. Logs don't lie. He stepped forward, opening the final page of the document, a screenshot of the system dashboard. The last line was clear. User TW's, vertical bar command, purge_system/force vertical bar status, completed successfully. No one spoke further. The chair took a deep breath, then announced slowly, "The committee acknowledges that data deletion after a federal subpoena may constitute obstruction of a federal investigation." He struck the gavel, the sound echoing through the room. Walz sank into his chair, hand covering half his face. JD closed the file, his gaze sweeping the heavy silence of the room. "Committee," he said, voice low but resolute. "From here, this matter is no longer political. We've crossed the line of debate and are standing in the realm of crime." He gathered his documents, then looked directly at Walz. A person can err in management, falter in leadership, but when they order the truth erased, it's no longer an administrative mistake. It's a criminal act. The air in the room was frozen. A reporter unconsciously lowered their camera, no one wanting to snap another photo. JD sat back, the screen's light casting onto his calm face, while Walz slumped forward, shoulders trembling slightly. The silence lingered, until the chair spoke a sentence that made it clear this was no longer just a hearing. "The committee refers all files to the Department of Justice. The hearing concludes its political phase. The rest belongs to the law." After the chair announced the referral to the Department of Justice, no one in the room stood. The air was thick, tense enough to cut. Tim Walz sat motionless for a long moment, then suddenly slammed his hand on the table, startling everyone. His face flushed red. His voice roared through the screeching microphone. "Who do you think you are, JD? Some vice president sitting there daring to lecture me on how I serve my state? I've worked for the people of Minnesota my whole life. I didn't steal. I didn't cheat. Everything you've brought here is just staged pieces." JD didn't react. He sat still, hands lightly clasped, eyes calm. The chair slammed the gavel, demanding order, but Walz continued to vent. "You're hunting me to serve your own politics. You're trying to take me down to score points for your side in the next election. You call this justice? This is a campaign to assassinate the character of a patriot." JD remained silent. He only flipped slowly through the file before him, looking down at the text, as if Walz's shouting was just a breeze. When Walz paused to catch his breath, JD looked up, his voice low but chillingly clear. "Mr. Walz, we're not here to talk about honor. We're here to talk about evidence." Walz stood abruptly, pointing directly. "Evidence? Everything you brought here came from you. I don't trust so-called evidence orchestrated by my political rival," JD replied succinctly, tone unchanged. "Then answer each specific question. We'll see if justice belongs to any side." He pulled 3 sheets from his briefcase, placing them neatly before him. Question 1. Do you deny signing the North Star Energy contract on September 14th, 2022? Walz clenched his fist. "I don't remember." JD tapped his pen lightly on the table. Question 2. Do you deny the T. Walz account executed the data deletion order on November 17th, 2023? Walz bit his lip, repeating, "I don't know." JD remained calm. Final question. Do you deny your wife's bank account received $275,000 from the Green Future Fund? Walz shouted. I said I don't manage my wife's finances. The microphone's echo reverberated through the room. Some reporters stood, scribbling furiously. The chair slammed the gavel repeatedly, calling for order. JD nodded slightly, continuing, Thank you, Governor. So for all three questions, you couldn't deny. The committee can draw its own conclusions. Walz braced his hands on the table, breathing heavily. You want to make me a criminal, don't you? You think you can stand here, throw stones, and be hailed as a hero? JD looked directly, his gaze icy. I don't need praise, sir. I need answers. And the truth doesn't need a hero. It just needs to be spoken. The room fell into heavy silence. Walz looked around, seeking a sympathetic glance, but no one returned it. Those who once sat behind him in support now bowed their heads. A sense of isolation enveloped Walz, making him tremble. He slammed his hand on the table, his voice breaking. You don't understand. I did everything for this state's benefit. No one's perfect. No one runs a system without compromises. JD stood. He gathered his files, his voice low, restrained. Compromise is when you protect the people, but you protected no one but yourself. The chair signaled security to approach. Concerned Walz might lose control. The tension in the room peaked, the sound of heartbeats almost audible through the microphone. JD looked around, then spoke slowly, each word clear. Dear committee, I conclude my questioning here. But before I step away, I want to remind you that what you've seen today is only the second file in a series of 3 federal investigation files. The room held its breath. JD lightly placed his hand on the remaining briefcase, its glossy black surface reflecting the lights. The third file, he said, will reveal something even those in this room don't yet know: the origin of off-budget funds and the role of related international organizations. Walz looked up, his face pale, lips trembling. What are you talking about? JD only responded with a faint smile, then closed the file in his hand. We'll get there soon enough, Governor. The truth never stops halfway. The chair's gavel struck one final time, ending the questioning, but no one stood. The room was steeped in a silence, thick with the scent of gunpowder, and at its center, JD Vance had turned the tide. The hearing was no longer an inquiry. It had become a trial where the verdict was taking shape. The air in the hearing room seemed compressed after JD mentioned the third file. The committee, reporters, and spectators were utterly silent. Walz slumped into his chair, his face ashen, hands gripping the table's edge as if clinging to something intangible. JD Vance stood calmly, his eyes sharp as knives. He slowly opened the remaining leather briefcase, pulling out a thick file bound with a green cord, its cover clearly marked, Federal Tax Review, Confidential Evidence. Committee, JD said, his voice steady through the microphone. This is the tax record of individuals and entities related to Mr. Tim Walz from 2018 to 2023. The data was provided by the IRS and the Special Audit Office under the committee's subpoena. I request permission to present the discrepancy between reported income and actual account balances. He placed a sheet on the stand, signaling the technician to project it on the screen. 2 tables appeared side by side, one showing officially reported income, averaging $185,000 annually, the other showing total deposits to Walz's personal accounts over the same period, over $4.2 million. JD spoke slowly, each word like a falling stone. The discrepancy is $4 million over 5 years. This money has no legitimate source in the tax records. The room erupted in murmurs. The chair frowned, asking quickly, Mr. Vance, is this verified data? JD nodded. Yes. The data was jointly confirmed by the Treasury Department and the IRS. All transaction chains are valid and match the payment systems of projects approved by the governor's office. Walz breathed heavily, his face flushed. I don't have any such account. This is blatant fabrication. JD flipped to the next page, projecting a bank statement. This is an account opened at Cayman National Bank. Owner Timothy J. Walz. Opened September 12, 2019. This account received 12 transfers from 3 companies: North Star Energy Solutions, Midwest Renewal Partners, and Brightpath Media, totaling over $2.8 million. Walz gripped the microphone, trying to shout, That's not my account. I've never been to the Caymans. JD didn't respond. He opened the next page, projecting a scan of the account registration, Walz's passport copy, with a signature perfectly matching the one in Minnesota's state bank records. The room fell silent. A committee member, voice choked. If this is true...
Well, this is large-scale money laundering.
JD nodded.
Correct.
According to the IRS's preliminary investigation, funds from Minnesota's state budget were funneled through intermediary companies, then transferred to an offshore account under Mr. Walz's name. A portion was reinvested into the campaign fund, violating the Federal Election Campaign Act and the Transparency Act. The chair slammed the gavel. The committee requests a pause to review the documents before further disclosure. JD didn't stop. He looked up, his expression calm, but his voice firm.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman.
But justice's time shouldn't be delayed, because I have a new bank statement, previously undisclosed data, delivered to my office this morning from the Treasury Department. He pulled out a small USB, plugging it into the projector. The screen lit up, showing a chain of international bank transactions, sender accounts, recipient accounts, SWIFT codes, dates, times. JD said, "This is the money flow from the Green Future Reserve account to Mr. Walz's offshore account. Each transfer is clearly labeled consulting service,
Media support, logistics fee.
All are categories that don't exist in the state budget records." A technician read the final line aloud. Transfer ID, #894377, November 17th, 2023. Amount $480,000. To Cayman National Bank. Account TJ Walz. All eyes turned to Walz. He said nothing, only stared at the screen, lips trembling but unable to form words. JD continued, his voice low like a hammer striking. Notably, this final transaction occurred on the same day Mr. Walz ordered the data deletion from the server. Two events, a financial action and a technical one, aligned to the minute. A committee member stood abruptly. This is no longer a question. It's a complete money laundering structure. The chair nodded, striking the gavel to maintain order. The committee notes this and will immediately forward these files to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Walz tried to speak, his voice hoarse. I only signed the papers brought to me. I don't manage personal accounts. I know nothing about these transactions. JD looked at him, his gaze not angry, only full of disappointment. Sir, ignorance doesn't erase digital footprints. Each time you signed, the system verified it with a fingerprint code, and every signature was yours. He stepped to the witness table, placing a final sheet, the 2022 tax report of Walz. He drew a red line with a pen. Total income, $184,600. No foreign assets declared. You declared no foreign assets, JD said. But this Cayman account alone held $3.9 million at the time of filing. This is tax evasion and false declaration, as defined under Section 7201 of the U.S. Tax Code. No one spoke. Walz raised his hand to cover his face, sitting silently. JD closed the file, his voice low but resonating through the room. Committee, this is no longer an administrative error, nor political ambiguity. This is a chain of federal financial crimes, concealed under the guise of power and reputation. He gathered his papers, eyes still on Walz, who now sat with his head bowed, shoulders trembling slightly. The chair struck the gavel one last time, his voice dry. The committee recesses for 15 minutes. After the break, we will forward the files to the Department of Justice. JD sat down, his eyes expressionless. He knew no more words were needed. The numbers displayed had spoken for themselves. On the other side, Tim Walz was no longer a governor, no longer an icon, just a man facing the truth he had tried to bury. After the chair announced the recess, no one in the room left. The air was thick with the sense of witnessing an unprecedented political collapse. When the session resumed, JD Vance stepped to the table, no longer carrying thick files, just holding an old envelope, its edges yellowed. He didn't introduce it, only gently placed it before the chair. His voice was low, deliberate, unlike the sharp prosecutorial tone before. Committee, we've talked about money, data, power, but now, I want to talk about what all of that obscured people. He opened the envelope, pulling out a sheet, folded in thirds, the handwriting shaky, ink smudged in places. The first line silenced the room. Dear Governor Tim Walz, I am the mother of Sergeant Michael Porter, who died during a training exercise at Stillwater Base in April 2010. Asterisk, JD continued, his voice steady, but catching at moments. I was told it was an accident, that the weapon exploded due to a technical error, but my son's comrades said otherwise. They said there was an unauthorized test order, that someone wanted it covered up. I only ask for a fair investigation, not for reputation, but to know what my son died for. I wrote this letter because I trusted you, Governor Walz. You were a soldier once. I believed you would understand the feeling of a mother burying her only child. JD looked up, his gaze resting on Walz's face, now bowed low over the table, hands clenched tightly. This letter, JD said, was sent to the governor's office on June 18, 2020. It was logged in the incoming mail system with code hash MSO 2023,117. And according to the records I have here, this letter was never answered. A committee member frowned. No response, not even a word of condolence sent back. JD shook his head. No, but there's more. He flipped to the next page, a screenshot from the governor's office mail management system. The final status read, deleted by executive directive, user T. Walz, June 22nd, 2020, 10:42 a.m. The room held its breath. JD continued. The letter wasn't just ignored. It was deleted. The deletion order was executed 4 days after the office received it, and Mr. Walz's account confirmed the action. Walz looked up, his face pale. His voice was barely audible through the microphone. I don't remember. I didn't delete anyone's letter. My office receives hundreds of letters a week, JD replied, his voice lower. But this wasn't an ordinary letter. This was a mother's cry for help. He stepped closer to the witness table, placing a copy of the original letter before Walz. You said in your campaign, no one understands soldiers like I do. Yet when a mother asked about her son's death, you didn't just stay silent. You ordered it erased. The chair lowered his eyes, his voice hoarse. Governor Walz, do you know anything about Sergeant Porter's death? Walz was silent. His gaze dodged, as if every light in the room was shining directly on him. No answer came. JD took a deep breath, his voice softer but resounding in the silent room, where even the sound of recording devices could be heard. Committee, I don't need to talk about data anymore. I just want you to see this. A mother trusted the system, trusted a leader who wore a uniform, and all she got was a deletion order. He paused for a few seconds, then read the letter's final passage, his voice heavy. If you have time, please reply, even just one line. Did my son die because of a mistake by the government you represent? I don't need an apology. I just need the truth. A female committee member wiped a tear. The chair leaned back, unable to speak. The room was utterly silent. The white light shone on the table where JD stood, while Walz bowed his head, hands trembling faintly. JD folded the letter, placing it neatly before him, then said softly, the truth you buried with power, it doesn't vanish. It just waits for another day to be read aloud. The chair tapped the gavel lightly, his voice hoarse. The committee acknowledges this document as humanitarian evidence, not just proof of concealment, but of a betrayal of trust. Walz said nothing, head bowed, eyes red. JD returned to his seat, not with triumph. He sat quietly, looking at the empty envelope on the table. A long silence blanketed the room, as if the space itself was bowing before that mother's scrawled words. And for the first time in the hearing, no one spoke of politics, only the heavy silence of those who realize the true cost of power when it forgets humanity. The hearing room remained steeped in heavy silence. After the soldier's mother's letter was read, the chair was about to close the day's session when JD Vance stood. His eyes no longer held the cold edge from before, but carried something else, weighty, as if he knew what was coming, would cross the line of ordinary corruption. Committee, JD said, his voice low and resolute. So far, we've seen crimes of power abuse, financial fraud, obstruction of investigation. But the file I'm about to present isn't about money. It's about the national security of the United States. The room froze. JD opened his briefcase, pulling out a thin file sealed with a red NSA label. The bold text stood out. Classified memo. Security breach. North Star data sharing. He placed it on the table, breaking the seal before everyone. 1 month ago, JD continued. The National Security Agency recovered a chain of internal emails between the Minnesota governor's office and an energy contractor based in Singapore, Eastern Dynamics Limited, according to the documents. Mr. Walz signed an agreement to share state energy technology and infrastructure data with this company for international green technology research and development. However, Eastern Dynamics is a subsidiary of Guangzhou Energy Systems, a company on the U.S. Department of Defense's restricted cooperation list, due to suspected industrial espionage. Camera shutters clicked rapidly. JD projected a copy of the contract. Minnesota's state logo in the top corner, T. Walz, clearly signed at the bottom. The contract's value was only $2.5 million, JD said. But the critical point is that it granted a foreign partner access to Minnesota's public energy data system, including information on the power grid, control stations, and energy storage systems, items classified as sensitive under federal law. Walz suddenly stood, his voice trembling. I didn't know about that connection. The contract was only for clean energy research, not related to national security, JD replied, his voice calm but firm. Sir, the contract includes a data integration accesses clause, granting direct access to Minnesota's technical data portal. And here is a memo from the Department of Homeland Security. He held up a classified stamped document, reading slowly. Minnesota's security system was accessed anomalously from an IP linked to a server in Guangzhou, China, on November 28, 2022, 2 weeks after the North Star contract was signed. The room's air seemed to vanish. The chair leaned back, whispering, "This is a national security breach." JD flipped to the next page, projecting the final image, a digital signature authentication record. The signature on the contract matches 100% with the authentication code of Governor Walz's account. No one else could have executed it. Walz braced his hands on the table, his voice breaking. Impossible. I didn't authorize federal-level access, didn't allow anyone to touch infrastructure data. JD looked directly, not raising his voice, but you signed, and the system confirmed. Every action that followed was the consequence of a decision you approved. A committee member asked quickly, was there any specific damage? JD nodded. Yes, 2 weeks after that access event, one of Minnesota's power grid infrastructure blueprints appeared at a Beijing energy conference under Eastern Dynamics research name. This was data classified as confidential infrastructure asset. The Department of Energy confirmed it was an official copy from the state's system. Murmurs rose like a wave. The chair slammed the gavel. Order. Everyone. Silence. He turned to JD. Mr. Vance, based on these documents, are we facing the transfer of classified data to a foreign entity? JD answered without hesitation. Yes. And that constitutes a violation of the National Security Resources Protection Act, Section 42, Title 501, a federal criminal offense. The chair nodded slowly, his face grim. The committee urgently requests that all these files be transferred to the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security for a formal investigation. He struck the gavel, the heavy sound echoing through the room. Walz collapsed into his chair, his face drained of color. He muttered incoherently, then looked up, eyes red. I only wanted international cooperation. I never thought. JD cut in, his voice low but steel-like. A leader's mistake isn't measured by intent, but by consequences, and your consequence is a hole in America's security system. No one spoke further. The room was utterly silent, only the sound of the clerk's pen scratching. Walz bowed his head, hands trembling. No more defiance, no more anger. Just the absolute collapse of a man, realizing everything he once was had ended. JD closed the file, speaking softly but clearly. This case began with money, moved through power, and ended with national security. At every step, Mr. Walz chose concealment over accountability. And today, what he hid has become a crime. The chair nodded, announcing briefly, the hearing will proceed with the committee's preliminary judgment. JD quietly gathered his files, while Walz sat motionless, eyes vacant. The room sank into a somber, solemn silence, the silence of an inevitable end. The chair sat quietly for a long moment after JD Vance closed the security memo file. The white lights reflected off the U.S. Federal Oversight Committee's sign behind him, a cold glow matching the atmosphere enveloping the room. Committee members exchanged glances, none speaking. Then the chair slowly stood, his voice hoarse with emotion and exhaustion. After 3 days of hearings, the committee has heard all evidence, witness testimony, and verified technical data. The documents clearly show Mr. Tim Walz, during his tenure as governor of Minnesota, committed serious violations of federal law, including financial fraud, tax evasion, obstruction of investigation, and disclosure of national security information. With this evidence, the committee formally recommends federal criminal prosecution against Mr. Tim Walz. The gavel struck, resounding through the room, like the closing of a political era's coffin. Some members bowed their heads. Others sat silently, pens in hand, but unable to write another line. In the back, television reporters held their breath, lenses trained on the witness table, where Walz sat hunched, hands trembling. He said nothing, only stared at the table, where the last document he signed in his political life lay, the Project North Star contract that brought him to this day. JD Vance stood. He showed no triumph, no trace of smugness. His voice was low and calm, but each word rang clear, etched into the air. Committee, today, we haven't just concluded a hearing, but an illusion. The illusion that power can hide the truth, that reputation can obscure justice. Across 8 file sections, from environmental funds, veterans programs, education, to offshore accounts and national security breaches, every piece of evidence points to one direction: a deliberately organized fraud system, protected by the very power of the person at the top. He paused, flipping open the file before him, his voice steady, firm, and solemn. We have fake contracts siphoning budgets, a man dead for knowing too much, teachers, accountants, and veterans left behind, and a mother who just wanted to know why her son died, whose letter was deleted like meaningless data. This is no longer administrative failure. This is betrayal. JD looked directly at Walz. His gaze held no anger, only the weight of someone witnessing a soul's self-destruction. Mr. Walz, he said slowly, you once said service is a sacred duty, but duty isn't concealment. You turned that duty into a shield to enrich yourself, to protect power, to bury the truth. And today, the truth has found you, needing no guide. The air was so heavy, no one dared breathe loudly. The chair nodded, signaling the clerk to read the final resolution. The Federal Oversight Committee recommends that the U.S. Department of Justice, FBI, and Department of Homeland Security launch a comprehensive criminal investigation into Mr. Tim Walz. Pending conclusions, Mr. Walz is suspended from all public offices, temporarily stripped of access to government records and secure accounts. Personal assets related to the case will be frozen for the investigation. As the decision was read, the room fell eerily silent. Walz looked up, eyes bloodshot, but offered no reaction. No more anger, no more defenses, just emptiness. He stood, staggered a few steps, then sat again, whispering, I just wanted to help my state grow. JD looked at him, replying softly, sometimes people call betrayal growth, but America never grows through lies. The chair declared, the hearing is concluded. The gavel struck one last time, echoing like a bell. Reporters stood instantly, but no one spoke, as if all understood this wasn't just news, but a moral verdict. JD Vance gathered his files, stacking them carefully, unhurried. He walked slowly past the rows, past Walz without turning. At the door he paused, speaking without a microphone. Justice doesn't rely on power or party. It relies on truth. And today, the truth has prevailed. His words silenced the room. An elderly committee member nodded slightly, whispering, that's why we still have faith. JD stepped out of the hearing room. The Capitol hallway stretched before him, late afternoon sunlight streaming through large glass windows, casting onto the polished marble floor. He paused for a moment, the light reflecting on his tired but resolute face. Behind him, the hearing room door closed slowly, ending a dark chapter in politics, opening a new era where the law, at least in this moment, stood in its rightful place. Outside, reporters crowded to film, but JD offered only one sentence before leaving. No one, whether governor or president, stands above the truth. He walked on, his shadow blending into the fading light. In the room, the Federal Oversight Committee signs still glowed, and on the table the sealed files remained slightly open, as proof that this system, though tarnished, could still cleanse itself. As staff began clearing papers, a light breeze through the cracked door rustled the documents, the light reflecting off the red confidential evidence text. All was silent, save for the light of evidence, the light of justice. In that final moment, America seemed illuminated again through this room, where lies were exposed. A man fell, and the system proved that truth, no matter how long buried, was bright enough to cleanse even the darkest shadows. The story of JD Vance and Tim Walz's hearing is not just an exposure of corruption, but a test of American democracy's ability to self-purify. Every detail, from the $68 million, vanished in the Green Future Fund. The purge all data before midnight, email, to the TB. Walz's digital signature on the Ghost Project North Star contract proved that the fraud wasn't from errors, but from a system designed to conceal truth. When tax records revealed a Cayman account timed with data deletions, and the letter from Sergeant Porter's mother was deleted by the leader's own hand, the story transcended politics to become a moral mirror. It wasn't just one man's fall, but a wake-up call for the ruling class. The lesson for Americans is to demand transparency through data, not promises. Demand governments disclose spending, track every contract, and protect those who speak truth. For leaders, understand that good intentions don't erase the consequences of lies. Power must never become privilege, nor family a tool for concealment. JD's final words at the hearing, "Justice doesn't rely on party, but on truth," are the strongest reminder. Data doesn't flatter, logs don't lie, and truth, if preserved, will be the light that re-illuminates American politics. If you believe truth and justice must always be illuminated, as in this hearing, subscribe to our channel to join us in exposing the secrets hidden behind power. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video, where we'll continue the journey to bring the light of evidence to every dark corner of American politics.